Welcome to Manager Tools. Today's topic, increasing team input strategies. Chapter 1, measure it. Here we go. We read lots of things about collaboration and consensus. I think I probably see something, just about every week there's something that comes across my desk on that topic. But much of it isn't terribly helpful. I mean, it's almost like fantasy talk, as if management thinkers can just invoke this picture of a rosy future and magically have behavior support it. It doesn't work that way. What's particularly frustrating is that there are several known and well-practiced techniques for increasing communication and contribution that we talk about all the time.
It's just crazy. Be collaborative, be communicative, work for consensus. And then you read these articles. I just read an article flying in and about this guy who coaches, and he says, you have to have your head in the right place, and you have to really work with your direct, and you have to see it from their point of view, and you have to see the future clearly. I'm like, yeah, great. Those are nice platitudes. If we're let's all be collaborative. But what does that mean? What do I do tomorrow to be more collaborative?
Take a collaborative pill. It works.
Yeah. There you go. Yeah, I'm taking pills and having injections. It's a condition. Yeah, but one of the ones we like, probably you and I like the most because we're engineers, but it's not necessarily the best. It's just one of many things you can do to increase the collaboration and communication on your team is to measure your team's input. It's not hard, but nobody talks about that. I suspect a lot of people would say, I can't believe you're measuring how much people talk or how much they contribute. I'm like, well, if you think people don't contribute enough, that implies that you measured and found out that they weren't where you wanted them to be. So look, here's what we're going to do. The first step in this process is, guys, you tell your direct you want more input from them. You've got people on your team, many of us do, who are more reserved. They're more quiet and they don't contribute. Or, if a 5-minute discussion happens during a meeting, a staff meeting or a project meeting or something, they hang back and they say nothing. And, some of them would say, well, everything was said, so I didn't need to contribute. The D's and I's were out there contributing, but I didn't need to contribute. So the first thing you do is say, I'd like more. And then what you do, this is classic sort of managerial behavior 101, you pay attention to their input for a month. Now that you've asked them to change their behavior, you pay attention for a month to see what you see. I mean, gosh, that's so fundamental. Anyway, our third point is, if they don't change, and usually it's the case that they won't change a lot, you say, hey, I'm going to start counting your input. When we're in meetings together, I'm going to start counting. Then, by the way, just telling people you're going to start counting, it makes an enormous difference.
Yeah, it does.
And then what you do, in many cases, we'll have to recommend that you have someone else on your team facilitate the meeting so that you're not contributing yourself on content and facilitating and trying to count one person's interactions or contributions or just talking. I mean, literally, we could call it contribution or we could say just talking. And another thing we found is you do your counting in plain sight. You don't hide it at all. You remind them, I'm watching you, I'm counting. I want more of this behavior from you, and I'm going to count how many times you behave in that way. Completely reasonable professional behavior for a manager. And then once a week, you share your tally. And hopefully you see improvement, and you see week over week improvement as well, until the point where they get where you need them to be. Pretty simple. It's behavior change 101, right? But you wouldn't get that from most people who tout consensus or collaboration. So simple.
It is simple. And it's like our first point, which is tell them you want more input. And it's amazing the number of managers who don't start off with that very simple step is tell their direct what kind of behavior they want from them. And this is really where most effective managers' success stories start, is telling the direct.
Yeah, we know when we want different behaviors, we tell them. And a lot of folks have lost this, and people are trying to come up with clever solutions for managing other people. But being clever with other people generally is, sometimes it works, but it can't be your fundamental strategy. Now, before we get into telling your direct you want more input, there is a first step here that we're going to allude to for just a minute. It's called Horstman's Rule of Mind the Gap. We'll go into it in more detail, but basically what it says is this. Effective managers are always asking, at what level of behavior or performance, which are the same thing, by the way, is this direct? And then you ask yourself, okay, they're there. Of what level are they capable? And or, at what level do I want them? And third point, what can I observe that will clarify my sense of their performance against the standard? It's one of the fundamental principles of management is your people present at some level of performance. Let's say it's 80 on a scale of 100, right? Solid. And, that would be a B, a low B in American grading. Not top, but not bottom. And you decide, I think this person's capable of 90 or 85 or 95. Well, we're obligated to get them to 85 or 90 or 95. And then ask ourselves, okay, what would I have them do that would prove to me they're an 85 or a 90 or 95? And then how can I expect them to do it? I mean, it sounds really simplistic.
Pretty obvious.
And, yeah.
kind of.
And here's the thing. It works. And you don't have to be really clever in order to do it. So in this particular case, that's sort of a backtrack there, dude. I'm sorry, but in this guidance we're giving today, we're assuming that has already happened. And you, as the manager, have found a gap between what your direct is contributing, as an example, not speaking up in meetings. Pretty straightforward. Now look, there'll be further guidance in other casts about directs who don't make recommendations about their work and processes outside of meetings, okay? And frankly, that's one of the keys of continuous improvement. People who make recommendations about how to get things better all the time. And too many managers, in our experience, don't engage in some simple underlying managerial behaviors to drive that sense of contribution. If somebody's on your team and they interact with a process, it is not unfair for you to say, I think you ought to be thinking about that process in order to contribute to this organization, not just meeting goals, but getting better in part by changing underlying systems for the good. Now, not everybody's going to be great at that, and not everybody has to do it every week, but we'd be willing to bet that 40 to 50% of the people on your team underdo that. And you're missing out on people who are smart, who could be making a difference. So look, what any effective manager does when there's a gap between where someone is and where they could be, in other words, a gap that you need to close as a professional, what we do is tell her direct. I mean, I know, fancy. Yeah, very fancy.
That's why you tune into Manager Tools. Nuggets of wisdom.
Nice. Yeah. It sounds simple, guys. But frankly, Mike and I have talked about this before. We think one of the biggest emotional burdens managers carry around every day is knowing there's a gap in the potential performance of some of their directs versus where they're actually performing. And then not saying anything, partially because they don't know how or they don't want to hurt people's feelings. We respect that. Okay. And they also sit around worrying about the gap and then not changing anything because in many cases we don't know what to do. That's why Manager Tools exists. And then there's more fretting about the gap and getting frustrated with the direct and not talking to the direct and getting more frustrated. And it's not healthy for us as managers. I don't think it's respectful of the direct. I mean, we could have a long conversation about that. But think about it yourself, guys. If you were at 70 on a level, I'm just saying, on 0 to 100, and your boss felt you could be at 90 and still be a professional, polite, respectful, caring, ethical person, would you want your boss to look at you and go, nah, he'll never make it. I'm not going to bother trying? Or wouldn't you expect your boss to say, hey, I think you can be better, and I want to help you do so. And I might light a fire underneath you a little bit in order to make sure you do.
So help me out here. Is our long-time listeners, should they just assume that the next 40 minutes is going to be a show about the feedback model? Because feedback seems like a reasonable place to start at least.
I think feedback's a part of this, sure. When you notice the gap, you talk to the direct, right? Politely, professionally, the way we always do with our directs. One way, you're right, is to give feedback. If you've reached the point where you're doing that with your team, some of the people listening say, what's feedback? Or, no, I'm not doing one-on-ones yet. Ooh, okay. If you're not doing one-on-ones, you can't be giving feedback. Or we don't recommend it. You can, but we don't recommend it. So you might say something like this. Hey, Claire, can I share something with you? When you only make one comment during a meeting, I'm not getting as much input as I need from you. Can you contribute more, please? It's pretty simple.
Pretty simple. Standard feedback.
Yeah. Claire, can I give you some feedback? When you make no comments on 2 topics that relate to your work, I think we're missing ideas from you that might be helpful. Can you work on that? Or, Claire, can I make an observation? When you don't contribute to our discussion about X, I think it takes away from our efforts as a team at being collaborative. Can you change that?
Now, you mentioned earlier, if you're doing one-on-ones and you're giving feedback, then you give feedback. But we don't recommend you give feedback if you're not there in our Trinity rollout process. That doesn't mean you don't provide them some input, right? When we say don't give feedback, we mean don't give feedback in the feedback model. So what would somebody say who's, say, just started listening to us? They're not doing one-on-ones. They're not using the feedback model. How would they proceed?
Yeah, and to be clear, guys, for those of you who are wondering, we do have a cast for that. It's called Negative Feedback Before It's Time. But here are some examples. Try these. Claire, I'd like to hear more from you during meetings. Please speak up more often. Or, you're not contributing as much as I'd like in our meetings. Please try to provide more input. Or, Claire, please speak up more often in meetings. Everybody in the team has a responsibility. Pretty simple.
Polite.
Pretty polite.
Professional.
Quick. Not a long conversation. Not an explication or an examination of why someone's not contributing. There's no why in feedback. We don't need to know the subtle psychosocial, emotional, behavioral issues that somebody has with not contributing. If somebody said, I'm sorry, I will never contribute. I'm uncomfortable speaking out loud in meetings. Seriously, how long are we going to keep that person around?
Right.
I love them. I want them to be successful, but it's part of their job.
Now, it's interesting. I think a lot of people would expect at this point that we'd suggest two West Point engineers, we'd suggest start counting, start measuring. But no, you're not saying that. You're saying step 2 is simply pay attention for a month. Tell me about that.
Yeah, look, ask for different behavior and then watch what happens. And most behavior change boils down to simply this. You're here, you're at this level, you're doing this. This is what I see, and I want you up here. We need you doing this other thing, and that's what I want to see from you. Once we've communicated the gap, it's time to watch for the new, different, better, more effective behavior. In your meetings with somebody, with a direct, listen for them speaking up. I know it sounds really simplistic. It's the cleverest thing we can think of. And you don't need to go into some formal process to tell your directs, you're here and I want you here and I think you're capable of changing. Most people listening right now, if your boss thought you were at 80 and needed you at 90, and she said, I'd like you at 90, and so I'm going to be paying attention. Most of you would say, okay, either tell me what to do, or hey, it's pretty clear what I need to do, and I'll work on going from 80 to 90. Okay, that's fine. Thanks, boss, for caring enough about me to tell me what I was capable of, to feeling that I was capable of doing more, and then expecting me to do it. And really, this is the first level of individual measuring for managers, and it's paying attention. This is, again, at the heart of almost all great managerial success. You expect more, and you pay attention. And you're right, dude. Some people say, wait, why are we doing this? I would be measuring. Well, the fact is, we are measuring. In fact, the original sensing we did about the gap, in this case, about collaboration, about how much they're contributing in a meeting, was a form of measuring as well. It's a little bit nebulous, but that's what it is. I see that they're doing so much. Something tells me I want more. Okay, maybe you could have a court of law say, Horstman's wrong. They shouldn't be at 91. They should be at 88. Well, okay. Let's not get too fine a point on this stuff. Definitely, once we tell our direct we want something different, we are frankly obligated to start paying more attention. That attention is what we do when we have an external metric that we apply, and it's the root of the measuring, of being able to compare where they are and where they're going versus where they've been. We don't need a report to be measuring, folks. We don't. Just looking at something we haven't previously paid attention to is a form of measuring. If your direct improves his or her contributions to where you need them, where you want them to be, give him positive feedback if you're at that state of the Trinity rollout, okay? And by the way, folks, if you don't know what that means, don't give them positive feedback. Just say, thanks for increasing your contribution. I appreciate what you've done. That's all. It's simple.
Yeah. I think there's a scientific principle about observation.
Yes.
Changes the whole performance measurement piece.
think Werner Heisenberg would have something to say about
something
that.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Something from way back.
Yeah.
Back there in physics or something. Okay, so you've been paying attention for months, but when you start measuring and start counting, are you going to tell your director, or are you just going to kind of ease into it and...
Oh no, I definitely want to. I definitely want to hide it, because my desire to have somebody be better is clearly something that the world can't tolerate.
That's something we don't want to talk about.
Yeah, I mean,
that's how we are here at Manager Tools. Just do it on the fly.
Yeah, I'm pretty certain that good, better, best never let me rest until my good is better and my better best. Oh, that's a big fat lie, and we shouldn't be telling people that. We shouldn't be asking people as human beings to deliver more value to the world so the world will become a better place. No, we shouldn't. We should totally do this quietly, under the table, like spies. Yeah.
I'm glad that you're finally taking the role of saying the stupid things. And
yeah. In fact, I think pretty sure in the 1960s there was a magazine called Mad Magazine where they had an entire cartoon comic strip dedicated to managers versus directs, and it was called Spy versus Spy.
There you go.
Yeah. Okay.
So the whole point is that just paying attention, right? Just paying attention often, or maybe even usually, isn't enough to change the person's behavior. And so you start measuring.
Yeah, to be clear, it's usually not enough, but it works a lot, and it doesn't require a whole heck of a lot of work. Let's start there. And I told somebody once, they're like, well, I really need them to change. I'm ready for them to change. Okay, well, they've worked for you for 5 years. You haven't talked to them about changing. A month isn't going to kill you. It's just not. So give it a month. Tell them you want a little bit more. See what they do. Don't be terribly scientific about it. And 40%, let's say, I'm making that number up, 40% change. Woohoo! That means you've cut down the number of people you need to count on their behavior change in half. Nothing wrong with that. So if they don't change, if they don't improve, tell them you're going to start counting. Directs do a little better, everyone does, when we tell them we want more input. In this case, we're talking about collaboration, right? But it tends to be somewhat short-lived. And that's generally true. Most of us don't realize the depth of the ruts we're in all of our various behaviors and our habits, okay? The effort to get out of some of those ruts is so noteworthy that when we're asked to change it, we remember the Herculean effort we go through, and we think that's what we remember, that effort, how hard it was, and we think, oh, that was hard, and I've changed. That's great. And we think we've made a difference, even though we've probably slipped back into the rut. It's hard to change. I did a little bit. I'm going to look at myself in the mirror and go, yeah, I'm probably fine. And when in fact, objectively, we're not. So the effective manager is going to tell his direct, hey, I'm not seeing as much as I'd like to see. To get us on the same page, I'm going to start counting your contributions. Okay? I mean, you say that. It's not hard. Now, as an aside of this, one of the downsides of the increased passiveness of the communications we all go through every day is that many of you heard what we just said. I'll say it again. Hey, I'm not seeing as much collaboration and contribution in meetings as I'd like to see. To get us on the same page, I'm going to start counting your contributions. Okay? And here's what many of you will change that into. You won't say you heard it that way, but you'll say, well, Mark, that means the same thing as I'd like to start counting your contributions.
Oh my.
Yeah, dudes, do not say that. Okay? It's funny. We have a small group, not a small group, we have a small minority of our listeners who think, I can't believe how precise they are. And we have a big group, but not necessarily the majority, who goes, wow, I love the fact that they give me exact phrases. Guys, the reason we give you exact phrases is we've tested the phrases. We know that, can I give you some feedback, works just fine after a short period where you've told your directs it's coming. We know that asking, how was your weekend on a Monday one-on-one is a bad thing. We know that there are better ways to say stuff. And when you say it that way, it opens a door to a discussion about whether you're going to or not, because you haven't said you're going to, you've just said, I'd like to. And so what ends up happening is that statement, I'd like to start counting your corrections, is probably true. I mean, I'm assuming you'd like to, you're going to do it, but it's just really inefficient and ineffective. Okay? It's dumb to have a discussion with them about whether or not you're going to. And there's a difference between saying I'd like to and I'm going to, period. It's our job to get more contribution from someone who's not speaking up. I mean, even though I don't think people who write television or advertising commercials and so on think about it, but we've asked them to improve. They haven't. You know, we've got all this fantasy talk about the workplace, how collaborative it's going to be and open and consensual, but nobody's willing to say, okay, where does the rubber meet the road?
You talk about TV and fantasy and workplace, and I think of The Office, and that's probably the equivalent of saying it the wrong way versus the good way, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Results.
Yeah, and it's so bad, it's cringeworthy, right? And it becomes funny. Yeah. No, we don't tell them we'd like to start counting. That's like going to your boss and say, I'd like to get promoted. Well, okay, well, good luck with that. No, we tell our folks, I'm going to start counting. Look, don't say that if you don't mean it. But if you're thinking about counting, then don't talk to your direct. Because if you're thinking about it and you're talking to them, they're going to assume that you could allow them to talk you out of counting. Oh, give me another chance, give me another chance. You've been watching somebody for a month, folks. When it comes to contribution in a meeting, which is something that's surprisingly ingrained habit, they're not going to change just because you say, well, I like to start counting now. Oh, boss, no, I'll get it now. I'll get it at this point. And really, how long should we have to wait anyway? Don't act as if you need their permission or you want to collaborate with them on how to measure. We've asked them to improve. They haven't. It's not a big deal. It's not. And measuring stuff that matters, and in this case, contribution matters in terms of having more ideas on the table, is what we do as managers. And then what you do is tell them you're going to try to give them weekly updates during their one-on-ones. And it's fair to say for most of our directs in our experience, maybe not all, we'll have been in 1 to 2 to maybe 3 meetings with any one of our directs in any given week. And that's enough to get a sense of how your direct is doing, whether or not she's stepped off in the right direction or she's moving in a different direction.
Now, there's a problem that I often see, or a challenge with this, in that the manager says to the direct, I'm going to start measuring, right? And then in the meeting, the manager doesn't manage or doesn't count because they get so caught up in the meeting, they just forget to count. How do we resolve that?
I love this, right? Guys, you have to have other people facilitate your meetings. Everybody in your team should be able to, we recommend you teach your directs how to facilitate a meeting, okay? If you struggle to run the meeting and pay attention to somebody's contributions, have someone else on your team facilitate the meeting. Now all you have to do is contribute yourself and keep track of what that one person's doing. Or potentially maybe keep track of what 2 people are doing in different ways, maybe not just in contribution, for instance. That's not too much to do. If that's too much to do, we get in a whole different problem, right? And, we won't go into it now, but if you don't know how to delegate running your meetings, or look, if you don't know how to teach running meetings, we have a cast about effective meetings, and then we have a cast about how to delegate running your meetings to some of your directs. And the question becomes, are you such a good facilitator that you facilitating allows a lot more to get done in that meeting than someone else, provided they've been trained a little bit, such that you must do it, and you doing it causes you to not be available to help grow one of your directs? Or might it be true that giving up facilitation won't make that big a difference, but now you're doing what all managers fundamentally ought to be doing on a regular basis, which is asking for more behavior, asking for more improvement or for more performance, and then measuring whether or not you get it. I think that's more valuable. And running a meeting isn't rocket science. It's just not.
This is going to surprise a lot of people, I think, but it really oughtn't, because we're going to recommend that you do your counting in plain sight. We've told our direct we want more input. We've told them that we're going to start counting, right? We've told them, we didn't say we'd like to, we've told them we're going to start counting. Why would we attempt to hide that, which we already told them we were doing? It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I think you're right. But look, I think there's some people out there that says, I'm not Mark, Mike, I'm not thinking about hiding what I'm doing, but they're wondering about how it's going to be perceived and so on.
Well, okay. Let's say you're not thinking about hiding it, right? Like you just said.
Right.
But you told your director you're going to do something, and then your direct doesn't see you doing it, well, what does that say about you following through on your commitments or on things you said you're going to do? I mean, even if you're not trying to quote unquote hide it, if they don't see you do it, there's a problem there, I think.
Yeah. Look, if you think about it from a reporting perspective, right? If you've asked for something to be done differently and everyone has to report on their changes toward the differences, aren't they more likely to make the changes based on the fact that they're going to have to report on it? And that's why this is part of why reporting and measuring work. A lot of managers, in our experience, worry that their directs will complain things like, "You don't trust me," or "That's micromanaging." And look, guys, if you're a professional, those accusations are just crap, okay? It's ludicrous to think that simply asking for reporting on a process change is micromanaging. And guys, this is not a question of trust. It's a question of management. It's a false choice to compare reporting with a lack of trust. If that were the case, public companies wouldn't have to report their earnings. We wouldn't have sales reps report weekly. We just count the cash from their sales and say, "Oh, he must have done X or he must have done Y." And that's because, greatest management principle in the world, as somebody else once wrote a book, the things that get measured are the things that get done. And I think far too many managers shy away from measurement because, I don't want people to feel like I'm giving them a report card. Are you kidding me? You give them a report card every year. You ought to be giving them a report card every day. And a lot of it ought to be, "You're awesome," right? It's completely legitimate for any manager to say, "Yes, I trust you." And reporting and measuring strengthen the trust between us by allowing us to agree on the metrics, not having to argue about details, and having a common frame of reference. Measuring and reporting about behavior or about performance, again, behavior and performance are the same thing, are simply really just transparent ways of cementing our trust to avoid either of us disagreeing because of a misunderstanding. And that speeds up the transfer of knowledge and it makes us more productive. So it's a false choice between trust and measuring and trust and reporting. We expect other people to measure and report on what they do. So if that's the case, and we're the one doing the tallying rather than the direct, don't keep your counting secret. Put your tally sheet right out there on your desk when you're in a meeting with 3 or 4 or 5 people. We hope our directs see it, and that motivates them to change their behavior. Does anyone seriously doubt that telling your direct, "I'm going to start watching you," and then them seeing that you're going to be counting, right? They still have a choice about what they want to do. If they feel pressure, well, first of all, I poked with an umbrella. They felt pressure all by themselves. But okay, I want them to feel a little bit of pressure. I'm feeling a little bit of pressure. I think they can do this. And if a little bit of pressure causes them to change their behavior, I'm all for it. And I don't think that we should get into an HR discussion about whether or not me counting how much somebody contributes. I don't see that as something that ought to put somebody over the edge mentally. If it is, that's not my problem. I mean, I'll be sensitive to it, but seriously, me counting is a big problem? It says I don't trust you? No. I'm stupid and I'm old and I'm forgetful. And so if I'm going to count something, I better write it down. So, yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
And again, we're not doing this in secret, right? And I think you mentioned earlier, during your one-on-one each week, just share your tally with your direct. Let them know how they're doing. And hopefully they'll get the picture and they'll have some good weeks and you have a chance to give them some positive feedback.
I think the first thing we need to do in this situation is we need to share what it is we're counting in the meetings, whether it's ideas offered or questions asked or opinions proffered or challenges made to other people or agreements verbalized, whatever it is. No, I'm not saying you follow this guidance on all behaviors. You may only be looking for one type of contribution from somebody. And I wouldn't get too picky about what type of input, though. If you remember, the purpose of this cast is to help people be more collaborative and to contribute more. So we want them to talk more. You cannot contribute in a meeting by saying nothing. Now, that doesn't mean everybody has to talk on every single thing. But if you want your folks to contribute more, you say, "I'm going to count every time you talk." And it may take a couple of weeks for you to realize they're just talking more, but they're not saying anything, okay? Like if they say, "I agree about the agenda we're going to follow." Well, okay, yeah, that's not collaborative. That's a lame attempt to talk, okay? But if we're talking about a process or a system or results or performance or project or an update or status, Okay. Yeah. Okay. You can count some of that. So if you're not clear about what it is you're going to count, and by the way, the list I gave her is a fine list. I'm not saying you shouldn't use it. If you want to use it, use it. Okay. If you get too picky, you're going to be violating the MT law of measuring, which is always start with quantity over quality. If you get too precise with a measure, you're going to end up arguing with your direct about whether they did or didn't do something a certain way, and that's just not a good plan. It takes energy away from the actual counting, the behavior change we want. And there are some directs who want to argue with you about every single step of this process. And all they're doing is trying to externalize their own frustration with the fact that there's a gap. You've identified there's a gap between where they are and where they want to be. And that's part of our job. But look, then what we do after we say, this is what I'm going to count, make clear to your direct, tell him, tell her, you're going to share their inputs on a weekly basis. Again, you're going to be able to aggregate 2 or 3 or 4 meetings worth of behavior. And that reduces the chances that there's any sense that one meeting was an aberration and therefore it's unfair. It's as simple as that. And you just start counting. And you trust yourself that what you're counting is right. And then as they start behaving, if you're far enough along in the Trinity rollout process, you can give them positive and negative feedback each week about their progress, about becoming more communicative and more collaborative. And I hate to say it, I'm sure this is not true. It's probably a little bit hyperbolic, but ain't nobody else teaching this stuff. If you want to be more if you want your team to be more collaborative, the first thing you need to do is have those people who never speak up or rarely speak up, they need to contribute more. It's not getting more from your people who are already talking. It's getting more and different ideas from everybody on the team. And if you're not getting ideas from 3 or 4 members of your 10-person team, it's your obligation to encourage them to contribute more.
Yeah.
And
collaboration it consists of a set of behaviors.
Yeah.
And that's the key. Once you make that connection, then the question is, how do you get more of those behaviors or less of the negative behaviors?
Actually, I think collaboration, dude, I've now decided that in the commercial world of Fantasyland, collaboration is a bunch of really skinny, handsome, or attractive people hanging out together in a meeting room where we're all chatting and people are throwing ideas up and everybody's smiling and their hair is perfect. And then it magically morphs into a cocktail party where they're all still together, but they've magically changed clothes slightly, so now they look cool and hip. And now they're all together exchanging ideas, and then suddenly they're writing on a napkin. And that's just awesome. That's the life I want to live.
Or a whiteboard in brown.
Yes. Yeah.
With a marker. Yeah. That just magically, yeah.
Yeah, it's good. All right, so let's wrap up. Tell your direct you want more input from them, because input is a good measure of communication and contribution and therefore collaboration. Pay attention for a month. You don't have to measure yet. If you don't get the behavior you want, tell your direct you're going to start counting. If you need to have somebody else facilitate the meeting, do your counting in plain sight and keep track of the tally. Okay? Look, guys, we feel the practice of management has really kind of lost sight of some of these simple techniques. There are a lot of managers in the world who are doing it, but not that many, not enough. You don't have to be smart or clever to be a good manager. You do have to have the discipline to do simple things and to pay attention. You certainly don't need to send somebody to training or have them read a book to improve their contribution rate. And the fact is, contributions are part of everybody's job. So it's our job to make sure it happens. And it starts with measuring that.
All right, my friend. Thank you.
You bet, partner.
All right. We'll see you. Thanks, everyone. That's it. We'll see you next week. Have a great one. So long.